Watch what happens when this girl approaches the bikers about tattoos. The diner smelled like hot coffee, frying oil, and something sweet from the pie case. Late afternoon sun pressed through the blinds in thin golden lines. A regular turned a page of the paper. A grandmother fussed with a napkin. A waitress wiped a table with the slow economy of someone who had seen this place steady through every town up and down the highway. Then the road announced itself. At first it was a distant vibration, like a small earthquake under the soles of everyone's shoes. The sound grew into a chorus of engines, deep, measured, not frantic, a rolling tide of chrome and leather. Conversations dropped, plates stopped halfway to mouths. The door swung open, and the sun caught on helmets and metal, scattering light like coins across the linoleum. They moved as a unit, jackets zipped, patches aligned. A man with an easy scar that cut across one cheek led the group. He moved with a quiet authority. His bike sat low and obedient beside him. People called him Connor, and his friends called him Ghost. The back of his hand had a faint crescent of white where a ring used to be. The others clustered around, a younger man with a beard like a timberline and a long, steady face, a taller one with a pale scar along his forearm like an old geography. On their jeans and jackets, the Desert Riders chapter patch gleamed, a name that meant route, brotherhood, and a choice to live on the road. The diner, in one blink, felt both smaller and more filled with possibility. A hush that wasn't fear so much as curiosity fell over the room. Mrs. Chen tightened her grip on the menu across from her granddaughter. Maya, age 7, small in a yellow sundress with hair in 2 braids, watched the newcomers with a look that was all teeth and thought. Her legs swung under the booth like a metronome. She had been quiet all afternoon. Maya had a habit of cataloging people like small treasures, the way the waitress tucked a stray hair behind an ear, the rhythm of the man who always chose the corner booth, the scar on the toddler who refused to touch his peas. Now her gaze slid from the helmets to the tattoos peeking from under jacket collars. One tattoo, a flourish of wings and fire inked in a loop around a small chain, caught the sunlight at a slit of skin on a forearm near Ghost's coffee cup. Maya stood up. She nudged her grandmother and then stepped away like someone who had drawn a little breath from the air and decided it belonged to her. If you love unexpected reconnections, like and subscribe to Bike Diaries. She walked like she was balancing the world on the tip of her foot. People shifted in their seats, some to look, some to shield. Mrs. Chen's hand tightened on her napkin. "Maya," she said in that low voice the way people use when they need a child to hear, to obey. Maya didn't stop. She crossed the room in careful, measured steps. The motors thrummed almost sympathetically. She reached the biker's table and stood before Ghost as if waiting for an answer. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was small but steady. "My mom has a tattoo just like yours." The room condensed around that sentence. Forks froze halfway. The coffee machine's steam seemed to halt mid-sigh. Ghost's hand paused over his cup. For a long moment, the only sound was a clock somewhere inside the diner, marking out seconds like tiny gospel beats. Then Ghost looked down at Maya. Up close, his eyes were not as hard as the leather around his collar. They were a pale, weathered blue, and they moved with a kind of recognition reserved for places or people who echo in memory. He nodded once, slow enough to be careful. "Show me," he said. Maya reached up, her small fingers trembling slightly as she pointed. "It's a phoenix," she said, rising from chains. My mom's name is Lisa." The name fell like a dropped coin into a quiet pool. It made a sound. Ghost's mouth softened into the shape of a memory that the rest of the room could feel like a temperature shift. His hand went to his cup and then stayed there. The others at his table looked at one another with a new kind of attention, as if someone had turned the lights on in a room they thought they knew. "Lisa Martinez," Ghost said, voice low. He spoke the name as if testing it. Then he repeated it, and the syllables changed shape. Not just a label, but a story clue. "There's Eliza, Firebird, been a long while." Mrs. Chen rose from the booth before she felt she could stand. "My daughter," she said, the words brittle. Her face had that tightness of someone who had rehearsed sorrow into anger for years. "My daughter left when she was reckless. We thought—" "She left to keep you safe," Maya offered, simple and immediate. Her small hand stayed halfway raised, like a question mark made of bones. Some of the bikers shifted. The scarred man leaned forward, his voice folded into 1,000 small concerns. "Where is she now? You say her name's Lisa Chen?" He said Chen like an attempt to place the family on a map. "Yeah, Lisa Chen," she said. "She got married. She stopped. A small hitch, like a pebble in a stream."
Ghost swore under his breath, not a curse, but an old-time surprised sound. He set his cup gently down as if it were something fragile. He reached into his jacket and drew out a photo folded into the crease of his palm, the kind of picture carried and recarried until edges soften and corners remember fingers. He unfolded it a fraction, a glimpse. A younger woman on a bike, hair whipping, a smudge of grease on her cheek, the phoenix tattoo bright and defiant on her arm. The photo was older than the cafe's vinyl, but it had life in it. "That's her," Ghost said. He didn't need to say more. The name had married the image, and together they pressed against the room like a familiar tune.
There was a weight behind his eyes. Not regret, exactly, but the kind of gravity that comes from witnessing something you once counted yourself part of and seeing that it's changed its shape. Mrs. Chen's knuckles had gone white on the booth. She looked at the tattoo in the photograph and then at Ghost's forearm, where the same design curled around her wrist, faded around the edges like a burned memory. "You knew her?" she asked. The sentence brimmed with accusation and yearning in equal parts. Ghost's mouth turned up, not in jest, but in something that might be called the memory of a smile. "We did a lot of things back then," he said. "She called herself Firebird. She saved one of us once. Not a story to make us heroes now, but it was a terrible night. She pulled a man from a wreck who might have died. She stayed when things could have gone a different way." The diner listened to the name as if it were a prayer. The younger, bearded man, Benji, lowered his voice. "She organized a shelter for people left with nothing after that flood on County Road. People don't remember the quiet parts. They remember the loud ones. Lisa was steady." Maya's voice had a curious steadiness. "My mom never tells the stories," she said. "She doesn't like people talking about the old days." "Some people," Ghost said, "want the road. Some people want something else." He folded the photograph back into his palm and reached into his wallet. He drew out a tidy folded business card and slid it across the table like handing over a small flag of trust. On the card, his name and number were printed. The Desert Riders chapter was listed in simple text beneath, harmless as a note on a community center bulletin board. "Call me," he said, "if you want to hear one of those stories." He pushed the card toward Maya like a boat back to shore. Mrs. Chen's breath came out in a slow, suspicious line. "Why would you?" she started, then stopped. A part of her wanted to believe that people could be kind for no other reason than kindness. Ghost cleared his throat. "Your daughter's name came up a lot," he said. "Not the things that make people point. The better things. The ones who don't make the news." He hesitated, then added quietly, "She saved my sister's arm once. Not just a dramatic line. She drove through a storm, found them, and stayed until help came." That detail shifted Mrs. Chen. It was one thing to hand a card to a stranger. It was another to be told that her daughter had once saved someone, stayed through a storm. Her face unbunched a little, like a curtain opening to admit light. Benji piled the cash from his wallet and set a crisp $100 bill on the table. "For the coffee and the trouble," he said, half joking, half earnest. "For the waitress." It felt like a small offering, and yet it held gravity, a way of saying they were not there to intimidate, that they would leave with dignity. The waitress accepted it with a surprised smile, and the diner found its voice again, like a warmed instrument. Maya tucked the card into the hem of her dress like it was treasure. Her grandmother touched the top of her head briefly, a motion knitting protection and permission together. There was a stillness, not of fear now, but of something that might be called possibility. Ghost rose to mount his bike. His movement was effortless, the way someone who has spent years on roads can make an action look simple. He looked over his shoulder at the little girl who had walked straight into a room full of men everyone else had been wary of. "Be safe," he called gently. "Tell her we remembered." His voice carried a compliment wrapped as instruction. "Will you come again?" Maya asked before she could stop herself, a child's hope loose and bright in the space between the chairs. Ghost smiled in a way that was quiet and final. "We will keep the road warm," he said. They rode out into the dwindling light. The engines rolled away like an echo, the diner exhaled. People resumed forks, the coffee steamed anew, and the waitress started refilling a cup as if they had all at once agreed to let the world keep going. That night, after the dishes were washed and the neon sign hummed a soft lullaby, Mrs. Chen folded the business card and put it in a drawer beside a stack of family photos. She held it as if weighing the truth of a person in the flat rectangle of paper. Maya climbed into bed and kept the card on her bedside table, close enough that if she woke with a sudden need to know more, she would find it without waking the house. 3 days later, in a small, sunlit kitchen, Lisa Chen lifted a glass of water and set it down again because the phone was ringing, and both the glass and the ring vibrated against the countertop in sync. The name on the screen was simple, Connor Riley.
Lisa's fingers hovered. There was a museum apartment of old choices on the table between her hand and the phone. The faded sleeve of the jacket in the closet she never wore, the photograph of her younger self with hair caught in wind, the tattoo on her forearm that she had once thought of as a banner and later as a map. She answered. "Lisa," Ghost's voice came over, a small enclosed thing that had been kept carefully behind years of throttle and highway. "It's me," she said. She could have hung up. She didn't. "I saw your daughter's eyes," he said without preamble. "She has your mouth." Something in Lisa loosened. The phone hummed with the presence of a life she had not expected to touch again. They spoke in the kind of sentences that cover a great distance without trying to measure it. Names of people they both knew, a mention of a town festival, a recall of a rainy night and a heater that wouldn't hold a temperature. Ghost didn't spill out the past like a torrent. He offered it like a loaf, a slice here, a crumb there, carefully measured. "I have a card," he said.
She gave it to her girl. She did? Lisa's hands trembled small. "Maya?" "Yeah," Ghost answered. "Maya. She's got your eyes." He paused as if to choose what to say next. "I wanted to tell you that people remember, not just the things that hurt, the things that didn't." Lisa let out a breath that might have been a laugh, might have been a prayer. "I left because I thought it was the only way," she said, voice thin and real. "I left to keep them safe, to keep my mother from tearing out what's left of me. I thought disappearing was the armor." Ghost made a small sound on the other end of the line, like someone turning a page in a book they had already read. "Disappearing doesn't fix everything," he said softly. "Sometimes it just repartitions the sorrow." They spoke for 15 minutes that felt like both forever and the shortest of things. Ghost told her of a night when a bridge washed out and a car teetered, and of how Lisa, younger and faster then, had stopped without thinking and pulled a man clear. He told her of the shelter she helped start after the flood. He said the names of people who had eaten warm food because of her. He said these with a restraint that made each small fact resound. At the end of the call, Ghost asked if he could come by with a couple of friends and have dinner. "We won't make a scene," he added. "We just thought, if it's all right." Lisa told him to come over the following Sunday. Her voice had a softness she used to reserve for things that mattered, but were also fragile. Sunday arrived with weather the color of clean linen. The bikers came not as conquerors, but as neighbors bearing casseroles. Benji carried a dish wrapped in foil like an offering. The scarred man brought a peanut brittle tin that made the children in the neighborhood squeal. They parked bikes along the curb like iron flowers and piled into chairs in Lisa's small house that smelled like lemon and older things. Mrs. Chen stood in the doorway like a sentinel, then moved to make room as if she could not keep the world out, but could at least make it hospitable. At the table, conversation folded and unfolded. Ghost and Lisa traded small stories that only people who had once known each other could tell in short, precise sentences. Benji laughed at a joke that had nothing to do with anything but the joy of two people rejoining. The scarred man, whose name was Harris, pulled a faded photograph from his wallet and passed it across. A shot of Lisa years younger, hair in the wind, the phoenix tattoo bright as a promise against her skin. Mrs. Chen touched Lisa's hand and did not pull back. "You have always been stubborn," she said, half scold, half affectionate. The sting of years did not evaporate, but it softened into something like understanding. "You have always been fire." Lisa looked down at the tattoo peeking from under her sleeve. The phoenix was a swirl of wings rising from a loop of inked chain. It had once been defiant and loud.
Years and sun had taught it patience. It had shrunk, settled, become a map that fit into the skin. Now, at the table with old friends and new faces, it read as both a scar and a hymn. Maya perched on the edge of a chair like a small comet. She watched, learned the rhythm between apology and forgiveness, tasted the way people could cross a line they used to think unbreachable and still find footing. Benji told a story about a road that led nowhere until they made it go someplace. There was a photograph handed around of Lisa on a bike at 20, hair whipping, the world behind her like a blur. Everyone leaned in. Laughter unfolded. Mrs. Chen later confessed a memory she had kept, the time she had hidden behind curtains and watched Lisa ride away, like she was watching a comet take the sky. "I was afraid then because I loved her," she said. "That love looked like a gate." "Love looks like a lot of things," Ghost said. "Sometimes it looks like letting someone go." At the end of the night, when the dishes were done and the words had thinned into comfortable silence, Ghost pulled Lisa aside. He handed her a small envelope. Inside, wrapped with the care of someone who knows the value of a symbolic gesture, was a photograph of the man she had helped on that washed-out bridge, now healed enough to be a volunteer at the shelter.
Some things, Ghost said, never get lost. They move in circles and come home when they're ready. Lisa pressed the photograph to her chest and, for the first time in a long while, let herself feel that the phoenix on her arm wasn't an accusation. It was a witness to survival. It wasn't a brand that defined what she had done wrong, but a map of what she'd carried through dark places and back to light. Outside, as the bikers mounted and the engines warmed, Ghost paused at the threshold. He looked at Maya, who had fallen asleep on a couch like a small island. He looked at Mrs. Chen and then at Lisa. He touched the scar on his cheek absent-mindedly, those small features that mark a life of weather. Things don't have to stay what they were, he said. People don't have to keep wearing the same names. Maya looked up, blinking sleepy eyes at the command of words she was too young to measure but old enough to understand. Like a phoenix, she mumbled, a child's understanding made bright. It burns and then it rises, Ghost finished softly. They left as they had arrived, without making a spectacle. The bikes took to the road with the gentle authority of creatures who know their way. The streets seemed to exhale. Behind them, the little house glowed like a pocket of warmth reserved for newly mended things. Weeks later, a neighbor would pass the diner and notice a faded photograph taped to the corkboard near the register. A picture of Lisa in her youth, on a bike, a phoenix showing like a punctuation mark. Someone had pinned it there with the note, "For those who remember, for those who want to."
People in the town began to nod in ways they had not before when the desert riders passed through. Old stories found new audiences. Stories of the bursts of goodness people had quietly done came out of hiding and began to stitch themselves into the town's memory. Maya grew more confident, in the way of children who learn the architecture of grown-up hearts early. She asked about scars and choices, and what it meant to be brave in small ways every day. Her grandmother softened into an ally who could both scold and hold, who could hand over a business card now and then with a faint, proud smile. Ghost and Lisa stayed in touch with a frequency that surprised them both. He would call to tell a joke about a misfired map or text a photo of a sunrise taken over the desert road. Lisa would send pictures of Maya learning to tie shoelaces, of a small hand dipped into a jar of preserves. Over time, their conversations stopped being about a single act and started to become a life of small exchanges, recipes, requests for help with a leaky roof, a ride to the market. One afternoon, months after the first meeting, there was a festival in town. The desert riders pulled in, not as a tide of outsiders, but as returning guests. Ghost dismounted and, with a private smile, pointed out a small stall where Maya was selling lemonade. She waved, sleeves rolled up, the phoenix spot just visible when she reached overhead. Ghost went up to the stand, bought a cup, and paid with a joke, handed back a business card she already had, and then added a small folded piece of paper with a number that would mean nothing to the town at large, but meant everything to a person inside a house debating how to make tomorrow kinder. The tattoo had once been an anchor and a target both, something that could mark you as other. But over time, within the town and at Lisa's kitchen table, it became a map of the woman who had lived more than one life and chosen again and again to care. For Maya, the phoenix meant her mother's courage. For Mrs. Chen, it grew into a symbol of resilience rather than shame. On a road that knew its own shape, the bikers rode away again, engines humming a steady lullaby. They did not disappear into myth. They simply continued, friends who had pauses in life where they paused to mend what they could. The photo taped to the diner corkboard stayed there for weeks, people pointing at it and sharing a nod. The town learned that appearances were a poor shorthand for a person's heart. In the end, the phoenix on Lisa's arm read something gentle and fierce at once. It read, "I have been wrecked and made whole. I have been broken and chosen to remend. I remember what burned. I remember what rose from it." Maya kept the business card under her pillow for a while, then moved it to a little jar with buttons and coins. She would show it to friends and say, "My mom's friends come on bikes. They bring peanut brittle." She did not yet know the full geography of adult choices.
She knew only that the world could be kinder than its reputation, and that sometimes the people you feared could be the ones who set you gently back on your feet. Watch what happens when this girl approaches the bikers about tattoos. A question small enough for a child becomes the hinge for a family to open again. A name spoken across the room becomes a bridge. A tattoo that could have been a scar becomes a mirror, reflecting more than a past, but a path forward. Have you ever reconnected with someone from your past?
Share your story in the comments and hit share if this moved you.